Hi everyone, welcome to Denman's Den. I'm Kathy Denman, and today I am going to have a little bit different kind of presentation than I normally do. Normally I share from an outline, at least, and sometimes a scripted essay or a reflection that's at least partially scripted. Today, I'm going to be speaking from my heart, and so I will be speaking without notes, extemporaneously, because this particular topic I feel like will come across better if I am not reading from scripted notes. What I want to talk about with you today is something that's been on my mind for probably 2 or 3 days now, and mainly it's been on my mind because of different things that have gone on in my life over the past 72 hours, I would say. And that topic is being able to embrace imperfection as part of what it means to be me, part of what it means to be you, part of what it means for us to be human beings. Not just embracing imperfection, but acknowledging the darkness that is in us as well as the light. We're not just all walking around beings of light. We all, if we're honest with ourselves, have a dark side, and we carry that around just as much as we do our light side. Now, some of us try very hard to hide the dark side, but it's interesting thing about the dark side, the more we try to hide it, the more that we deny it and try to pretend that it doesn't exist or deny that it exists to other people, the more that it ends up controlling our lives. So I have a reason for wanting to look at this topic, because I believe that the truth about not just me and not just you, but the truth about, ultimately about God, the truth about this world, and the truth about everything that's happening in our world right now is very much connected to the fact that the majority of the world is in denial of its dark side, and certainly does not want to embrace its own imperfections. And so I would like to, in particular, and this is probably going to upset some people, but I would like to just share that, I get a little tired of being told what I should or should not do. And I get a little tired of being told that the way that I do things, if it's not in agreement with the way someone else does things, is somehow wrong or flawed or, in need of complete revision and relearning. And I am becoming weary of that. There are several people in my life who make it a habit on a fairly regular basis, if not daily, then at least 2 or 3 times a week, to remind me of things that I should or should not do, or ways that they think I'm wrong about some particular issue. Now, I am certainly guilty of being wrong many times in my life, and I'm not done being wrong. I'm sure I'll be wrong before the end of today even. So but I think that people do that. They do the should routine, or they try to tell you what they think you need to do, because it keeps them from looking at themselves and their dark side and their imperfections. And so if they can focus on yours, they don't need to see theirs. And so the first thing that I want to say about imperfection is that what keeps us from focusing on the imperfections of others and therefore passing judgment on them and telling them, shoulding all over them, what keeps us from doing that is our ability to admit that we are not perfect, and be able to admit that on a daily basis when we see things that we could have done better or differently, or or things maybe we didn't do that we could have done. An example in life that's one of my favorite examples is the game of baseball. Now, keeping in mind that I'm in my 71st year of life, and when I was a child, the National Football League wasn't really a thing yet. I was a teenager by the time the first Super Bowl was played. So, I am more familiar with baseball. But even forgetting the familiarity, it's still my favorite sport, even after all these years have passed. And I think the reason is because it is the only sport in all of the sports we play on this planet that counts errors equally with successes. So at the end of every inning, it's how many runs, how many hits, and how many errors. And it's also the only sport which measures the skill of a player by the mistakes they make, not by the things they do right. So you measure how good a pitcher is by his earned run average. How many runs does he allow in a game on average? And that tells you, his skill level as a pitcher. So his skill level is judged not by the perfect games that he pitches, but by how many runs he allows or doesn't allow, as the case may be, in a game that he pitches. Same thing with batting averages. They don't average based on how many hits you make. They average based on how many times you're up to bat. What percentage of the time do you manage to hit a ball that gets you on base? And just like to point out that I have never in my life heard of a player in baseball who's ever managed to hit half the time that they're up to bat. They make a hit. The highest batting averages are sometimes in the maybe 390s, maybe even get past 400, but never half the time. So it is a game in which the errors and the mistakes are as important as the things that the players do right. And that's as it should be. It's a game that embraces our humanity. It embraces and says errors are okay. In fact, they're part of how we can tell how good you are. Isn't that interesting? There's kind of a balance there. We can tell your gifts as a player by the mistakes you make are incorporated into that assessment of your skill. And to me, that's why baseball is my favorite sport, because it embraces humanity and into its fullest aspect, that the errors are part of the truth of the game, just like my imperfections are part of the truth of Kathy Denman, okay? Usually people that just out and out maybe say, if I say something that they don't agree with, instead of saying, well, I don't know that I agree with that, I disagree, they'll say, you're wrong. People that have, close friends have done that to me, and on more than one occasion. A person who tells you you're wrong directly like that is usually someone who struggles to see their own arrogance and on a regular basis, and struggles to admit it. It may be if they see it, but they just can't admit it out loud, either to themselves or to somebody else. And so, frankly, some of my wanting to talk about this comes out of my frustration with, being around people that spend more time pointing out my errors and what I should do than just accepting the fact that I'm not a perfect person and that I'm not going to always do things exactly the way they do things, but that I am a human being, and I'm a balance of light and dark, and I'm a balance of things that are imperfect and things that are quite well put together. So, I think that that's the first thing that I want to emphasize, is that we really take a look at embracing imperfection as part of who we are, as part of who I am, as part of who you are. The more I embrace my own imperfections, the more compassionate I am with yours. So that actually brings me maybe to the second thing that I want to point out, is that right now, today, is Holy Thursday. So we're in the middle of Holy Week. For some schools, and it's spring break, or it's a week off right now. And so there's time to reflect about different things that are commemorated during Holy Week. And so today, Holy Thursday, is when we commemorate the Last Supper of Jesus that he had with his disciples. It was the last Passover before he was betrayed and then tortured, beaten, and eventually crucified. And, this isn't called Holy Week because it's perfect and because it's all beautiful and nice and holiness does not mean that, okay? Holiness includes the dark side too. And Holy Week is holy because it includes a betrayal and a crucifixion and a lot of blood and violence before we ever get to the resurrection and the new life. Holiness includes the darkness as well as the light. And, I have a friend who believes that every illness and every negative attitude and anything negative in life she labels it a demon. She believes that it's a demon of the flu, or a demon of a bad cold, or it's a demon of rebellion or a negative attitude or whatever. And if I'm sick, she wants to lay hands on me and cast out the demon of whatever sickness it is that I might have, whether it's my bad back, or in my case I have Parkinson's as well. She thinks that suffering does not come from God and is all evil and must be eradicated. Okay? And so, of course, she's going to see any kind of illness or negativity, since it causes suffering, inevitably, as a demon that needs to be cast out. And the truth is, illness and negativity and bad attitudes, quote unquote, are all part of being human. We are mortal, okay? We are born, we live, and we die. And in between, we get sick. That's just how it is. We all suffer. Some of us more maybe than our share of suffering. Some of us maybe not so much. But we all, in some amount, have to endure suffering. And now here comes another thought that is, I know, going to upset some people. But I am not, trying to win friends here. I'm trying to present reality, and even if it's painful, it needs to be put out there for people to think about. The quote unquote rapture of the church is not a biblical concept. Okay, it is not in the Bible. Some people will quote you a passage from 2 Thessalonians about the trumpet will sound and the dead in Christ will rise first. That's not talking about a rapture of the church. Okay, that is not a biblical concept at all. What it is a concept invented by Christians who think that they're, now they have Jesus, so they're maybe beyond suffering. They're too good to suffer. They're going to be rewarded for having, Jesus in their heart, so they're of course going to avoid the suffering altogether and be raptured away. And that's where that whole Left Behind series came from. It's not biblical, okay? Everything in there that they talk about as being as an interpretation of something the Bible says is not at all what the Bible says. Suffering is something that we are all meant to do. It doesn't matter how good we've been or how bad we've been. And if you look at back in Jesus' time, the Pharisees and the Sadducees used to say that people were blind, or they were deaf, or they were poor, or whatever they were, because they were sinners. And again, that was their complete misunderstanding of who God is. God is not a being that is above suffering and is should be powerful enough to eliminate all suffering. That is just, God is so much bigger than that. Suffering is part of who God is. Suffering is part of, my partner Vaughn asked me the other day, what does the image of God mean? Well, that's part of the image of God, is suffering. As human beings, we suffer. We get sick. We have bad things happen to us. We suffer. God suffers too. This is not something that, we have to have this perfect God who is all-powerful and all-knowing and all this and all that, so that he doesn't suffer, or she doesn't suffer, or it doesn't suffer. God suffers. Okay? To try to eliminate suffering from life ends up bringing more suffering into our lives than if we didn't. And again, I'll give you an example of that. Addiction. People get addicted to alcohol, to drugs, to gambling, to sex, to food. Why do they become addicted to these substances? Because they are trying to eliminate pain and suffering from their lives. And what I am saying to you is pain and suffering are not to be eliminated. Now, we're not supposed to run out and go find them either. We don't have to. They'll come to us because we're human after all. And one of the Psalms, I think it's Psalm 34, says that God is near to the brokenhearted, and he suffers with those who are crushed in spirit. Now, is that because God is so powerful that he's above all suffering? No. It is because he is so powerful that he suffers with us. In fact, having power and using it to enter into the pain of humanity, that's not only true power, that's true love. And that's who God is. So, Holy Week is holy, not because it's perfect and because all good things happened this week. In fact, mostly bad things happened this week, and that's why it's holy. Another conversation that I had with a friend of mine recently, in fact, yesterday, maybe a little bit this morning, I can't remember exactly now, but we were talking about the Star Wars mythology. I think of it as a modern day mythology that we have identified with in our country, and probably other countries have too. And one of the phrases that sticks out for me in that is bringing balance to the Force. And in the first 3 movies that were made, which were actually the middle 3 of the 9 Star Wars movies, but the first ones that were made in the 70s and the 80s, Darth Vader was the villain, if you will. He was the dark side. He represented the dark side of the Force. And one of his favorite phrases was, "You don't know the power of the dark side," And in the 3 prequel movies that were made in the 1990s and early 2000s, a young Anakin Skywalker was probably the only Jedi who could admit to his faults. The others seemed above everything, and they frequently put themselves above everything. But interestingly enough, because they put themselves above and were in denial, in a sense, of their own darkness, in the second of the prequel movies, there was something called the Clone Wars, which was instigated by the Jedi. A war instigated by, a religion, basically. And why did that happen? Because that religion had lost its balance. And there was a prophecy that said that this young Anakin Skywalker was going to bring balance to the Force. And yet, it seemed like he did everything the opposite of what you might think would bring balance. He became the embodiment of the dark side. And he knew it. He even said, "You don't know the power of the dark side. I follow my master because I have to. I chose to." And it isn't until the very end of his life, the last act of his life, that he does what he was called to do in the first place, what he was chosen to do in the first place. He brings balance back to the Force. And he does that by saving his son. And in doing, he saves himself. He saves basically the Jedi. And they sort of reform themselves in the last three movies into a little bit more balanced version of what they could have been before, had they been willing to see the darkness in themselves. I can remember Yoda even saying, "How could we not see this was coming?" I mean, he knew. They became blind to the evil that was going on around them because they were in denial of their own evil, okay? And a person that brings balance to the Force is the one that is not in denial of their own darkness and is willing to own it and admit it regularly and to, always be facing it. And not so much as an enemy, but as something that's part of who they are. And, that leads me to another sci-fi, I guess, if you will, myth that I grew up with, which was the Star Trek original series, with Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock and Bones McCoy and Scotty and all that. And one of the early episodes was called The Enemy Within. And it was about, basically, Captain Kirk. He got caught in a transporter beam glitch, and when he reappeared on the Enterprise from the planet he was exploring, he appeared as two different people, as a good, kind, gentle man, and then on the transporter pad a few seconds later appeared this other version of him that was angry, lustful, selfish, greedy, you name it, every 7 deadly sin, okay? And for a while that dark Captain Kirk wreaked havoc on the Enterprise while people tried to find him. But in a way, the good Captain Kirk wreaked havoc too, because he was indecisive. He was afraid to hurt people's feelings. He was afraid to make a mistake. And so he didn't have the skills for leading the crew and making decisions that were needing to be made because of the situation they were in. And so, without giving, the ending away or anything, suffice it to say that, Captain Kirk needed both of those parts of him in order to be the person that he was born to be. And, he recognized that. And, they titled the episode The Enemy Within. And I think they called it that for good reason, because we often think of our dark side as an enemy. And it doesn't have to be an enemy. That the dark side of us can be a companion on the journey. And I think that's the way we have to see it. It companions us. It companions our light side. They walk hand in hand through life, okay? So I think it starts by embracing our imperfections and accepting the fact that the truth about me are my errors and mistakes and my imperfections and my character defects, as well as those gifts and good parts of me, and the beauty that is in me. That both of those make up who I am. And I need to be willing to acknowledge that every single day. And quite frankly, I do need for other people around me to acknowledge that about themselves, so that they'll quit telling me what I should and shouldn't do, shoulding all over me, so to speak. I just get tired of hearing that. It makes me feel as if I'm not being accepted for who I am, which is a person who does many things well, but is also very imperfect. So I also get a little tired of being told when I should and shouldn't do things, and how I shouldn't do them. And I have friends who do that occasionally, and I don't need to be parented again. I did have 2 parents already, and they, God rest their souls, have passed, and they taught me enough to where I parent myself pretty well. So I don't need to be have someone put themselves in this sort of position over me where they have to sort of hold me accountable and parent me. I need, again, to be accepted for who I am, including the imperfections and the imperfect way that I do things, even if they're not to the timetable and the exact way that maybe the other person wants them done. And so, out of frustration for that, I think, is what began my reflection on all this in the first place. So that's the second thing, is just to remind us that holiness does not mean all light and goodness and saintliness and, the paintings with the aura around, the halo around your head or whatever. Even the people with the halos have a past, and they have a present, and they have a future, and the past, present, and future includes their imperfections, okay? The halo is not all light. There's darkness in the halo too, okay? Something that's holy, that word, just so you know, the word holy has its roots in the word wholeness. Wholeness. A whole being is one who is light and dark, who is gifted and flawed. Okay? A whole person is an imperfect person. And so we need to remember that holiness, including Holy Week, have much more to them that is dark, really, than is light. In fact, the light at the end of the week looks that much brighter because of all the darkness during Holy Week to begin with. And then finally, just to think about bringing balance to the force in your life. Because the force in your life is both light and dark. And I know that's hard to hear, because in our Western mind, we like things to be black and white. And God can only be the light and the white. And I'm presenting to you that no, God is holy and whole. Includes all of that. And I hope to speak to more of that maybe tomorrow. I've already I have written some things down on that one that I'm going to share. But suffice it to say, this is probably enough for today. And you have heard it from the heart. And for those of you that I managed to offend or upset a little bit, maybe that sense of being offended or upset will cause you to take a closer look at what I have said and at yourselves in the process. So I just want to thank you for listening to this heartfelt impromptu sharing that I did today. And I appreciate your allowing me to be vulnerable with you, and I appreciate that you are hanging in there with me while I do it. And I wouldn't do it if I didn't sincerely love and care about my audience. And even those of you that I have never met, it's really important to me that somehow, even though I've never met you, that in some kind of way you can connect with me, and I feel as if we are friends even though we've never met. So again, thank you for coming to Denman's Den today, and I will look forward to seeing you tomorrow, where I will have something prepared for tomorrow that will be a little less impromptu, but still along the same lines. So I look forward to sharing that with you. And in the meantime, my signature sign-off has become "Listen for the wind." Take care. Bye-bye.